Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. These words were written over 250 years ago and were delivered on January 1st, 1773, as a New Year's Day sermon by a minister named John Newton. The words reflected his life as a former slave trader, a person who nearly died from a shipwreck, and someone who had experienced God's amazing grace in such a dramatic manner that it changed the rest of his life. From words in the sermon to the most recorded hymn in history, it has become a beacon of hope, love, and grace. It's estimated that the song is sung over 10 million times each year. It has been performed by renowned artists like Elvis Presley, Mahalia Jackson, Andrea Bocelli, Janis Joplin, Alan Jackson, Aretha Franklin, and Judy Collins. From the days of slavery to the civil rights movement, it was a beacon of hope, love, and grace. In 2015, President Barack Obama sang Amazing Grace during the eulogy of Reverend Clementa Pinckney, who had been tragically killed a month earlier at Mother Emanuel AME Church in South Carolina. Reverend Pinckney was among the 9 black church members who lost their lives in a horrific racist mass shooting. During the peak of COVID lockdown, a priest in London played Judy Collins' rendition of Amazing Grace for doctors caring for patients at a local hospital. Inspired by this act, Collins released a new version featuring a virtual choir with over 1,000 international singers. It was still a beacon of hope, love, and grace. This week, we are highlighting our core value of being guided by grace. In our statement, we wrote that we believe we are saved by grace alone, and God's unconditional love is extended to all people through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Being guided by grace, we embody the good news of the gospel in all we do. And that sounds so wonderful. But how do we live that out practically in our individual lives and as a community of believers? When we connect this value to the values of everyone every day and being rooted in relationship, I can see how they intertwine with one another. A couple of weeks ago, Pastor Lauren did an incredible job of highlighting the profound significance of having a well-defined value system. Using the metaphor of a tree with its roots and branches, he effectively demonstrated the significance of having a solid foundation. And last week, he shared with us the importance of being rooted in relationship in his own personal testimony. Sitting in the congregation last Sunday morning, I was overwhelmed by emotions of gratitude and love as I listened to him share his story. And it was a profound revelation to me that I am indeed in a community that is safe and supportive. And for any leader, that is an amazing place to be in. Today we connect the people and the relationships to the one who gives us unconditional and unwavering love. The one who is love, the one named Jesus. And the story of the adulterous woman is one of my favorite Bible passages. There are so many twists and turns and cliffhangers that it reminds me of an old-time soap opera. You know the one where you can stop watching it and then pick it up a couple years later after 2 episodes? Yeah. It's easy to do because the storyline doesn't change that much. It's full of shady relationships, accusations, judgment, and drama. But there are 2 major differences between the story we heard today and those that we watch on TV: Jesus and grace. We read that the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman to Jesus who had been caught in the act of adultery and made her stand before all of them. And who are the all of them, you may ask? In verse 2 of John, he sets the stage for us. It's written that early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and began teaching. When they brought the woman to Jesus and placed her in front of everyone, he wasn't hanging out on the mountain chatting with his friends. He was in the temple, in the holy place, teaching to the people. And since it was early in the morning, we have no idea if only men were present. All we know is that they rudely interrupted his sermon. Could you imagine if a group came through right now through those doors and dragged someone up to the altar? Could you imagine the fear that the woman may have felt in that moment? There are a few things that I find interesting about this story and questions that I wonder about. First, what in the world were the scribes and Pharisees doing that they were able to catch her in the act of adultery, and so early in the morning? Number 2, where was her partner in crime? And number 3, what in the heck was Jesus writing in the dirt? Every time that I read this passage, these 3 questions come to mind. But then I pause and I remember, Melinda, that is not the focus of the story. The focus of the story is that Jesus gave her grace. And I would offer to you today that he also gave grace to her accusers and to everyone in the temple. Jesus knew immediately that the scribes and the Pharisees were there to test him. He was well versed in the law, and he knew exactly what they were referring to in Leviticus 20:10 and Deuteronomy 22:22, which addressed the act of adultery and the punishment that goes with it. And what they said to him was partially true. Yes, in the law, Moses commanded them to stone such a woman, but it also commanded them to stone the man as well. You see, this wasn't an act by religious leaders who wanted to keep the community safe and uphold sacred texts. No, this was the act of fearful leaders trying to test and trap someone who they saw as a threat. And if Jesus had said, yes, go and stone her, it could have portrayed him to be a person of rebellion. And the Roman Empire may have seen him that way, the very system of power who had the authority to execute people. And it also would have contradicted his message of love and forgiveness. If Jesus had said, no, do not stone her, then they would have accused him of violating the law, at least as they saw it, and contradicting Moses. So what did he do? He bent down and he started to scribble in the dirt. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke volumes. And when they kept pushing on him, he finally stood up, looked at them, and said, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." That was it. "Look at yourselves," he said. "Look deep inside your heart and remember your own story. What have you done in your past? What sins have you committed? What decisions are you willing to make today?" Jesus always focused on the heart, and he wanted them to remember their own story. It's the same for us. We all have a story. It has many chapters, but very few people get to read all of them. Most people only know about the chapters that we share with them, or the ones that they walk into when they meet us. In writing this sermon, one of the closed chapters in my story came to mind. It was written in a time in my life when everything was turned upside down. A time when I had to lean on God, even though my faith was shaken. It was 2006, and our family was extremely active in church. We participated in worship services multiple times a week and volunteered in programs on various days. We were firmly planted in our faith, and honestly, as a single mom, I felt pretty proud of myself because everything seemed perfect. My daughter Alyssa was in 7th grade at that time. And I remember one day her coming to me and telling me about a friend at school who had begun cutting. And when she told me this news, I immediately said, "Oh, poor girl, do they go to church?" She responded, "I don't know, I don't think so." And then I said, "Well, you should invite her to church one day." And followed up with that faithful praise, "I will pray for them." The girl was the same age as my daughter and also lived with a single mother. But in my mind, this was all happening because they didn't go to church. Or maybe because they weren't as faithful as we were. In my mind, all they needed was Jesus. Maybe if they started going to church on a regular basis or visiting our church, then everything would work out. A few months later, I received a phone call from my daughter's school asking me to come into the office. And when I got there, I saw my daughter sitting in the office, visibly upset. The principal said, "Would you like to tell your mom or should I?" And there she sat in silence. He told me that she had been sharing a journal with this friend, and they were talking about all the things that teenage girls talk about, but also about cutting. Then he said, "Go ahead and show your mom." And in that moment, she pulled back her sleeves, and there were cuts up and down her forearms. I was shocked. I was heartbroken. I didn't know the signs to look for because I never imagined that I would have to. Remember, we were the perfect family. I was that proud single mother who had it all together. And our lives, they weren't like her friend's life. We had faith in Jesus. We went to church every week. Not just on Sunday, not just one service. I'm talking about we were there for 3 services, multiple days, and I volunteered in every program that I could. And still, I was sitting there looking at the pain in my daughter's eyes and at the cuts on her arms. In that moment, I had no words, only tears. And the days, weeks, and months following felt like a fog that hovered over our home. My son and I were constantly on high alert, watching my daughter's every move, hiding every sharp object in our home, and never leaving her alone. It was the most helpless time in my life as a parent, and I spent many days on my knees in prayer. The song Amazing Grace played repeatedly in my car because it was one of the few songs that I could sing from memory. It became my beacon of hope, love, and grace. After a few different counselors over a couple of years, my daughter was on a path of healing. And there were many things that she learned about herself and the pain she experienced at that time. But that part is her story and only hers to tell. When I look back on that time, I remember feeling so lonely as a mother. I never said a word to anyone at church, never spoke to my pastor about it, because I thought that their families were perfect and that they had it all together. At least that's what I thought. I didn't tell my family for a couple years because I felt ashamed and I didn't want him asking her tons of questions. You see, shame is a powerful thing. It can make you believe that your story is not worth telling. Then one day I was working on a presentation for a women's group, and I asked Alyssa if she would be willing to share her story. I said, there are going to be a lot of mothers and daughters there, and I really think your story could help someone. She agreed, and so many people were blessed. And they thanked us for being vulnerable and sharing what happened in our lives. I share this chapter of my life with you because of my sin in the story. My sin of self-righteousness. You see, it's how I acted when my daughter told me about her friend. Not only the words I said, but the thoughts that ran through my mind. I was not being guided by grace. I did not give or express grace to that family in any way. I only expressed pity towards them. And I thought with a judgmental mindset. That experience with Alyssa, along with many others that our family experienced, taught me the profound truth that the grace given by God through Christ is a free and life-saving gift. Grace didn't reverse the words that I spoke or my thoughts that day, but it liberated me from the power of shame. Grace didn't dismiss the actions of the woman caught in adultery or those of her accusers, but it gave them an opportunity to act and reflect in their lives and make a change. It's because of grace that I stand before you today and share this story. It's because of grace that I said yes to the call in ministry. When we are guided by grace, we extend the same love that Jesus does through our actions and our conversations. When we are guided by grace, we meet people where they are without judgment, remembering our own story of faith. When we are guided by grace, we invite all to receive the meal of grace at the Lord's table because it is Christ's table, not ours. When we are guided by grace, we proclaim the truth that in Christ, love and life win. And to that I say thanks be to God. Amen.